So, what is the relationship between co-working and community building? That's what's next up on today's episode of Talk About Your Community. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you may happen to be. You've tuned into Talk About Your Community. I'm Todd Nilson, your host with Clocktower Advisors. And on this show, we get the opportunity to speak with people all over the globe, working with all different kinds of technologies who have one thing in common. They are community builders, and they have expertise perhaps in sociology, psychology, all kinds of different areas of community building. And we bring them on the show to gain their insights, to have casual conversation and interactions about the kinds of work that we do to help brands and organizations, causes and movements to do better at connecting people together and doing wonderful work. So with that in mind, I've got a really terrific guest lined up today, Mark Shaw, who's been with Etsy and some other big brand names, and we'll get a formal introduction of him here when I bring him onto the screen. But he is a community builder and has done a lot of work in co-working spaces. And so we're looking forward to hearing from him a little bit more. Before we get into that, I will just ask that if you are a newcomer here, this is a live show on that's streaming on LinkedIn and YouTube, and we would love it to have you participate in the process of the show here. So please add your ideas and your comments as we go along here in the chat boxes. And if you happen to tune in afterwards, after the live stream, and find us on YouTube or LinkedIn, I would still love to hear from you. Please add your comments and ideas to the stream as well. And I try to respond to each and every person who comes in to acknowledge their ideas and insights. So with that said, one other piece of housekeeping is that we do these shows every other week, every other Friday at 10 a.m. U.S. Central Time. It's getting into the afternoon or evening hours for Europe, and into the earlier hours, maybe 8 a.m. for Pacific Coast. But hopefully you can join us and share your ideas and insights when we go on live. I wanted to mention that our next show is February the 9th. So that's Friday, February the 9th at 10 a.m. Central. And I'm going to be having an old friend on the show, Phil Gerbishak. He and I go way back when we were both living in Milwaukee. He has been living other places around the country here in more recent years. But Phil is a growth revenue expert specialist and a really terrific outgoing guy, and proud to call him a friend. He is going to be coming on to talk a little bit about growing your revenue and building a sense of community. So really kind of taking that sales edge. I think a lot of us who have been professional community builders over time have concerns about selling, within communities, and thinking about how to build trust, how to create transparency, and yet offering opportunities for building that sense of belonging in a space, and being able to sell at the same time, being able to grow your revenue is, I think, going to be a really interesting topic to go into with him. So be sure to save that in your calendars. We're going to have the link to it up here shortly after today's show, so that you can sign up and not miss a single episode of what's coming up. We do have guests booked out through March now, but still looking for people. So if you know of an expert, somebody that would have an interesting take on community building from whatever discipline they happen to come from, please suggest them to me in the comments or by sending me a DM. That being said, with no further ado, I'm going to bring on the stage here Mark Shaw. Nice to meet you, as it says in your nameplate there. Welcome from the land of ice and snow, right?
Yep, one of them at least. Calling you from Sweden, Stockholm, Sweden. So yeah, definitely on the icier and colder side, especially this year.
Mark, why don't you take a minute or two and tell everybody a little bit about your background and your journey into the world of co-working and community building, and we can kind of take things from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. And first of all, thank you so much for having me, Todd. It's super fun to be here. And yeah, And it's going to be really fun to talk about this today and see what other community things we end up going into as well, because it's a big topic, and I have been in a few different spaces, both just in my life and in my professional life as well, as much as you can separate those two things. But quick about me, as you asked. So I am here in Stockholm, Sweden, but I actually am from the United States. I grew up in just outside of Minneapolis, in a town called Excelsior. And I lived there for many years, played in the music scene, and enjoyed that life for a while. Worked in an independent guitar store, and the music scene too. I will also say both of those were very community type spaces. So I kind of was brought into that world without really consciously meaning to. And it wasn't, well, I guess the guitar store is my job, but the music scene wasn't really my job. It was just a way to connect with people that cared about something that I cared about and were interested in something. It wasn't really a conscious decision. But I think that inculcated in me a real sense of community and knowing the benefit of community. So I then moved off to Chicago and lived there for a few years, and then moved to New York and lived there for a few years and started working at Etsy, where I did end up working a bit with community, although a little bit more indirectly, but really super like engaged, passionate community at Etsy. So the bit I did get to work with was super, super fun. And I learned a lot. And it wasn't always positive, nothing against Etsy, but there was some very stark and strong criticisms of the company from our community. It was very interesting to be on the receiving end of that. And then I moved here and to Stockholm about 11 years ago. And kind of through happenstance, but because I was working remotely for Etsy, I found myself sitting in a co-working startup office. And when things ended with Etsy, that co-working startup said, "Hey, do you want this job?" And I was like, "Not really." But then I was like, "Well, maybe." And then I took it, and it was a wild, wild, wild ride to work in a co-working startup for a lot of reasons, which I think we'll get into. But the community part of it was absolutely the best part of it in so many ways. Just, going in every day and being around all different kinds of people that were pursuing different goals, different entrepreneurs, different people that were just employees of companies, and everything in between, different colleagues, especially. It was really a special place. So it was about 3 years ago that I left. Then I was working at a video game, helping run the team that does the social media and community, another extremely like passionate community there, if we want to talk about that too. But yeah, the co-working is kind of the slice we're looking at. And I guess, I should also add, I've been working with TEDxStockholm for a couple of years on the side, more like on communications, but getting more and more into like building the community and kind of trying to define what that means, because it can mean a few different things for us, what we would consider our community. That was a lot from me, but it's getting to be an increasingly long number of years I've been alive, so things have happened.
That's the occupational hazard of being alive, right?
It is, and I'll take it any day.
Absolutely. Well, man, we've got so many interesting things to talk about. A couple of quick shout outs to Marta, one of my colleagues with the Community Consultants Collective. Marta actually works in co-working as well. So I'm sure she's going to have some questions and ideas and things to share, as we kind of get into the conversation today. And also Stefania Apostol. I don't recognize the name, but forgive me if we have had some connection. Is that somebody that you know, Mark?
It is, yeah. We worked closely together actually at the video game that I just mentioned.
Wonderful.
So it's really awesome to hear that name. That's a name I always love to hear. Yeah.
And anyone else who's out there in the live stream, we actually unfortunately can't see who's live on LinkedIn, even though we had a nice turnout for it. People said they would attend. I'm never quite sure how many people were on until after the stream, so I'll just say a generic hello and glad you're out there. And please don't be shy jumping in as you have things to talk about. Mark, just out of curiosity, well, first of all, I love your background on the music scene and sort of how you described that experience of really, that becoming kind of the blueprint or the imprint for your understanding of about building that sense of community and belonging. But I know you're still active in the music scene and playing in a band in Stockholm as well. Was it was it Etsy or was it the music scene or whatever that brought you to Sweden, or just kind of a, hey, what the heck, I just got to go check out another country? What was the story there?
Well, so there's a long answer and there's a short answer. I'll try to like quickly compress the long answer into a short answer. But I ended up coming here with my now ex for her job. She was working for H&M, which is a huge, clothing retailer based here, and they really wanted her to come work at the head office. And at the time, I was like, I don't want to leave New York. I don't want to leave Etsy. And she's like, well, why don't you ask them if you can work from Sweden? And I was like, sure. And I did, and it ended up working out. So I was able to do that for a few years. But the longer part of the story is that I actually was an exchange student in Sweden when I was a teenager, not in Stockholm, but I had a really good friend who I'm actually going to go have dinner with tonight, who was an exchange student in Minneapolis, and we became good friends. And I ended up coming here for a year, not Stockholm, but 2 hours from Stockholm as a teenager. So I actually have a history with Sweden. I don't know if it's because I'm from Minnesota and there's just some like weird pull that Sweden and Swedes have on me, but
It could be.
here I am.
Well, and you're being interviewed by a guy of Swedish descent as well. So
yeah, as we discussed, yeah, Örebro background, city in the middle of Sweden.
No, so I don't speak a word of Swedish, but like, are you conversant with the language?
Yeah, so because I had a background as an exchange student, when I came here, I did have like a pretty decent, workable knowledge of the language, although it took a lot of practice. And it actually, I can 100% credit working in the co-working company for making me be professionally fluent in Swedish, because I had to speak Swedish and I had to be good. Because my phone would ring and it could be anything and it could be anybody, and I had to understand it and give a professional answer back right away.
Amazing,
So
amazing.
so yeah, so I mean, nobody who's from Sweden would mistake me for a native speaker, but I am fluent, but I could be a lot better.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I'm jealous of your bilingual capacity, because I had years of French, and I can scan it with my eyes and know what it's about, but to actually speak the language, I don't get enough practice, to do it, to be any good at it.
That's what it takes.
I definitely take your point. So let's start out by talking a little bit about the community startup, because it sounds like that was sort of the start of your journey, with Etsy and co-working in that space, and then them asking you to be a part of that space. I'll share along the way some of my own experiences with co-working spaces, because when I was living in Milwaukee some years ago, I got involved with a co-working startup space that I absolutely loved. I thought it was a great place, but they struggled to make that transition to connecting people digitally as well.
Mhm.
And so I'm really interested about any insights you've got about sort of like building that sense of belonging within the physical space, as well as, if or how that can or even should translate into a digital community space. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's of course it's a great question, and it's a increasingly relevant question more and more as time goes on. Just when you think we can't get more digital, of course we keep getting more and more digital. I don't know where the ceiling is, but we haven't hit it. So yeah, that was of course one thing that we were trying to figure out how to do. And it's tough, and I'm not sure that we ended up and in fact, I'm sure we did not end up nailing it. We tried different things, and I think we tried a lot of the sort of solutions that you would expect, and maybe a couple things that were a little more off the wall. But I think when it comes to a co-working space, the physical community, and especially, we're talking pre-pandemic here,
Mhm.
like the physical proximity that everybody has to each other just like creates a different set of conditions for a community in so many obvious ways. And to try to like take that magic and put it into a digital space leaves you with a lot of different challenges, because it's absolutely not the case that your sort of top community members, however you want to define that, but I would say engagement with you and with each other, they're not necessarily going to go onto your digital space. They may be 0% interested in going into your digital space. So what do you do? And then the converse is true as well. Like you may have someone who's like, hey, I'm super happy to sit around in a Slack and share memes, but I am not talking to anybody. So, so yeah, I mean, it's really a challenge. And so you probably can gather from what I said that we set up Slack, at the time. That was kind of the tool that we thought made the most sense to try to get a sort of like, a channel that had sort of sub channels that suited what we were trying to do, and tried to give also autonomy to the different offices we had. I should like little asterisk explain that our company was a little bit weird because we were a co-working company operating in a strange space where like the idea was to take over buildings that were slated to be torn down or otherwise renovated and temporarily fill them with co-working spaces at a much more affordable price point. So we would work with local landlords that are in this like years long process to get buildings in central Stockholm torn down. And there's all these interventions that can happen with people appealing because of like historic preservation or just whatever other reason. So buildings will sit empty for years and in the absolute center of the city. And so the founders of the company had this idea, hey, let's go in and fill these spaces temporarily, and started working with huge, landlords that were owning these buildings. So I mentioned that just because like we were working in different buildings that would like kind of come online and with a expiration date that could sometimes get extended. But we had different Slacks for different of these different spaces. And so you could really see like a sort of an A/B test between the spaces, like, wow, that really resonates in that space and not in this other space, and one space that I think the space that kind of had the best consistent community because it had the best community manager. It wasn't me, unfortunately, but my colleague knew, totally brilliant social genius community manager. Her space through a lot of setbacks was absolutely like, I think consistently the best community, and its Slack was the best community. So I think the best thing to do if you want a digital community for your co-working space, have a really, really awesome community in person, and have a community manager that also can help get that translated and do the engaging things you need to do digitally. And it's kind of like obvious stuff, but the devil's in the details, and there's kind of takes that alchemy of a really good like community manager to get the right people doing the things.
I do. I agree with you. I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with the personality of the community manager and even really what the chemistry is with the members, and sort of, who's because you could have the best community manager in the world, but if you've got a group of members that just want to put their heads down and don't want to mess with each other, or talk to each other, then it just ain't going to work. It's going to be an uphill battle to try to make that experience work.
Well, and to add to that too, like one additional challenge, and I don't want to like get into like too broad generalizations about, cultures or anything, but I think it's pretty fair to say, with, anthropological and sociological scientific backing, that Swedes are not the most outgoing culture. And so when you have a co-working space that is full of people that, of course, not everybody, because there were some not huge international companies, like in the sense of multi-conglomerates, but companies that were international that brought in a lot of like employees from the rest of Europe or from the world. But there were a lot of people that, of course, were from Sweden and were maybe like a little less inclined to be outgoing than, like, say, Americans, for example. And so that was a challenge too. Like, how do you get these Swedish people that may be not so inclined to talk to strangers to, talk to strangers? And that's, yeah. So I just wanted to like point that out too. And that was something that I think we got pretty good at, getting people talking.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right to point out that there are localized differences in the ways that people are likely to want to interact with each other, cultural differences, even even generational differences in the ways that people want to meet and interact. I know I've tried to introduce co-working applications, on the digital side to different groups over the years, like a Slack, and found that the 50 plus crowd, not to a person, because I'm in that category myself, but many of them resisted the idea of having a more or less synchronous presence-based app like Slack to work in. They would rather be working in email. Honestly, that was sort of their world that they were comfortable with. And so if you were going to use a platform like that, you probably needed to take some extra steps to ensure that they were going to feel comfortable sharing things about themselves in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the generational piece is there as well, and I think we had the advantage, and I don't know if this is generally true, but I would go out on a limb and say it's probably kind of true anyway, that the kind of companies that are attracted to co-working spaces are probably a little bit skewing younger, because it's often like startups and entrepreneurs. It absolutely was not uniformly the case for us. I mean, we definitely had some diversity of age, but not that much. And the companies that were kind of coming in and like the most ready to be like on Slack and engaged with, the different things we were doing, were, I think, more on the younger side, but not the absolute youngest, old enough to kind of like want to sort of be a part of this other thing, but like not so young that they're just like, I'm kind of more interested in my friends, if I was going to generalize anyway.
Yeah. So Mark, I'm going to pause a second just to welcome some other familiar faces on the show here. I wanted to say a quick shout out to Matthias. Matthias Fleming is a friend and colleague from the Community Consultants Collective, and he is with Yard Digital as his company, and he's based out of the Netherlands. So at least over in the Nordic family of countries out in your direction.
Sure.
Longtime friend, friend of the show too. Also wanted to say hello to Mark Schwenke. Mark is a colleague of mine from many years, an excellent community manager. Be great to catch up with you sometime soon, Mark. Great to see you on the show. Thanks again for popping in as usual. And then I would also be remiss if I didn't say hello to Rachel Petzold, a dear friend of mine, who I met through the Fractionals United community. And actually, we're going to have the community manager for Fractionals United on the show at some point in the near future. Fractionals United is for fractional executives, and Rachel is a chief product officer, fractional par excellence, who's worked for some great big name brands, and is an absolutely wonderful human being as well. So hi Rachel, terrific to see you as well. Mark, I'm wondering, as I start thinking about co-working experiences, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, I had I think a very positive experience in a couple of places when I was living in Milwaukee some years ago, which is around 10 years ago or more, when these things were happening. I joined a co-working facility when I was living downtown in Milwaukee, and the structure of that space was very interesting. You would walk in the front door, and it was a cafe in the front. And so basically anybody could come in for the cafe. But if you were part of the co-working group, you had a fob and you would go into the back area, and there was sort of an open bullpen space that was used for some meetings and presentations. It wasn't ideal for it, but it was homey. And then you had all kinds of little cubby holes to go into if you wanted to do private calls, and there were a couple of meeting rooms that you could rent if you were doing like more of a board meeting, kind of stuff thing. And it occurs to me, and I'm sure Marta's going to have some stuff to say about this too, because she designs these spaces, and you're going to have some things to say about it because you had these inherited spaces that I'm not sure, how they get used. Like, how do you consciously design to create interactions in those physical spaces? And do we have an equivalent in the digital spaces? This is something that I struggle with continuously over time. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like that's maybe one of the key questions when you're thinking about a space is like, well, what is the place where people like, hopefully will interact. And the answer is always the same thing. And I'm sure you know it. Like it's where the coffee machine is. It's where the kitchen
Yeah.
is. You know, it's
Yes.
where food happens. If those are the same places, but definitely the coffee machine. Coffee, coffee, coffee. Not that everyone has to drink coffee, but even just like that space, like that's where those serendipitous conversations
Yes.
happen. Just like in, well, just like any office, really.
Well, you're totally right. So there's a book that was published back in the 90s that I keep coming back to and that I love. It's called Not So Big House, and it's about architectural design of homes. And one of the observations there is that the center of the home is more often than not the kitchen, where people come together, because
Hmm.
that's where the action is. That's where we're eating. That's where we're kind of sharing things. And
Yeah.
if you've ever been to a party, it's the same thing. Everybody congregates in the kitchen area. So
Yeah.
that totally makes sense to me. Um,
Yeah, and that's exactly what it's like at the house I grew up in, which I also probably should have added in my background was absolutely like a house. My parents are very social people, and I have a pretty big family, and I mean in terms of cousins and all that. And our house was kind of a place where people hung out. So I was like, just this is normal. There's always a lot of people around,
yeah,
and
yeah.
the kitchen was always the space. And even when I was home just a few weeks ago, we had a party on Christmas. It was like sardines in the kitchen. There's other rooms, but we were all in there. Why? Is it's just
Yep.
there's something about it. There's something communal about it that
It's a
I think
cozier
it's just
space,
like DNA level for humans.
yeah, there's
Yeah.
little alcoves there, places, where you just feel safe and comfortable, and a little easier to open up to others. I wanted to share, I loved Marta's description of this as a gravitational point,
Yeah,
in the experience. I think that's so
totally.
amazing. You just kind of thinking about that in those terms. Um, are there other gravity points when you're sort of physically designing a space that you could think of?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing. I don't know for me if any of the spaces we had ended up with something that obviously like competed meaningfully with like kitchen type coffee type spaces. We of course tried to create other lounges. We did like strange things like because like the first space we had was in a 8-story building where most of the floors were actually abandoned, and we had 3 of the
Wow.
floors, one of which was also too damaged for us to really rent out. We put a music room up there. And
Oh,
so we
interesting.
had like a drum set and guitar
Oh,
and bass and keyboard and PA that people could go up and play music while looking over. Like, I can't stress enough how central Stockholm this is. It was like literally next door to like the parliament. You could look out the window and play a
oh,
guitar
wow.
solo, which of course doesn't like appeal to everybody in terms of like what that they're actually going to do it, but it is like an interesting like thing to have kind of as part of your brand. um so that was but that that didn't really work in terms of being like a gravitational pull, although there were moments where someone like kind of had a little party up there, and
Yeah, I
um
mean, I can see it's maybe not like a place where you would go every day, but like
yeah,
amazing as a place. Like if you wanted to, like I could see you wanting to relocate yourself to a spot like that. If you just wanted to blow off some steam, hey, I just got to play some tunes for a bit and get in my own headspace.
yeah,
Or if you wanted to do like a retreat, for you and your team to get up to a different space, like change the context. Um,
yeah,
but it's like that. It's that social. There's a social intention to that space, then
yeah,
that makes it another viable gravitational point. Maybe, like, as you said, it's not like the central point like the kitchen is, but it's
yeah,
got some interesting stuff. There's some amazing comments that are showing up here. I just want to share some of these, Mark, and give you a chance to reflect on them.
yeah,
This
yeah.
this one, I apologize, I can't tell which LinkedIn user this is. This is all I see from this end. But I love this. I'm experimenting with virtual worlds. This is a passion point for me. Um, since we don't have the draw of food and drink, we need to use
Mhm.
other ways to cultivate those moments. How do you translate co-work in a virtual world? I love that question. Mark, yeah, do you have any thoughts about it?
Yeah, I mean it's tough. I mean, like I haven't tried to like create, and I'm not sure I even totally understand when I think about like I'm trying to think like co-working space in virtual worlds. That's really interesting. I'm not sure what that even means. I can kind of semi guess, but having worked a bit with digital communities, especially at the last job with Stefania, who's here, we were trying to try and not really metaverse level though. So I'm kind of like fumbling for something meaningful
Well,
to say, because I have a feeling that this is somebody with a lot of expertise that I don't really know. But I mean, it is often just like the advanced common sense stuff of just getting the right people in there, and like getting the person who's gonna be like a little bit of a gravitational force in their own way to get
yeah,
other people attracted. We did try. I remember we tried to have during the pandemic when I started at my last job. We tried to have like a, well, they're called afterworks here. It's sort of like a happy hour, kind of like a have a few drinks together after work kind of thing. They tried to do that with our company, and we were like a 200-person company. And I don't know the tool, but you probably do. Person whose name we unfortunately don't know.
it's Sarah Segrist, and hi Sarah, great to see you. Yes.
Sarah, hi. Nice to meet you, Sarah. You probably know this tool, but you could kind of go into these like virtual spaces, and like your little avatar had a proximity, and the people that came into proximity with you, you could like actually like speak out loud to.
Yeah,
I don't know. I
yeah.
mean, it was, I think for us, it was all learning curve and not really social experience. So I can't really say. So that's kind of the end of my expertise. But I think it's always, to me, like community always ends up being like which people can really like attract and pull other people into it. So I don't know if
So
there's a way to have a good community manager in your metaverse.
I think you have to,
Yeah.
and I'm involved with a metaverse startup called Kickback Space, and like as you're describing, like there is proximity that's based in that space. What I love about metaverse spaces is there is proximity and there's serendipity, the same way as if you're walking into any kind of other physical space. I
Yeah.
think we need to think of them more architecturally as we go. And I'm excited about that question. It's one that I'm turning around in my head all the time. And the light bulb that went on for me was when you were saying, like, yeah, a person is the draw for that. Maybe it's not the community manager. Maybe it is in some cases. Maybe they're
Yeah.
a draw for it. But like maybe it's a celebrity or an influencer of some sort.
Totally.
Like if the gravitation point is not food, if it's not the kitchen to go to, then the magnetism, the gravitation is around people, and what you're drawing into. I also think though that there are lessons to be drawn, like from architects who are thinking about like having a bottleneck space or having breakout spaces for people to get together and meet, having alcoves literally in those metaversal spaces. There's like a whole other question about that of getting people involved. And I wanted to share. There was one other thing with you too that I was thinking about those gravitational spaces. I'm reminded of there was a study that was done. I wish I could find it. I remember devouring it and reading it and saving it in my articles, but I can't find it again. But it was actually it was a library system in Denmark, in the Nordic country of Denmark, that they were trying to create in that public space more intersection points socially with what was there. So they created like this interactive projected collage, on the floor that was like, so if you stepped on it, it would change colors, or another spot would light up, something that creates curiosity in the space that encourages people to start interacting with each other
Yeah.
or passing through that
Yeah.
environment. I keep thinking about like, how do we build that in our community spaces online, right?
Yeah, I mean, like thinking of it, that to bring it back into like the physical realm for a minute, but just to react to that, I mean, it is really impactful to just have like a small little conversation point. Like, it could be such a silly thing, or not a silly thing, I guess. But like two things that
Sure.
have always got people talking to me are like I almost always have some like ridiculous like animal shirt on, and like
Oh,
it's
yeah.
amazing how many people will speak with you about that. And it's one of the reasons why I just like refuse to drop it, because it's like it's nice, it's like, hey, cool. And the other thing is, and I don't know how you bring this into the metaverse, but it certainly, like I used to, I guess I have another now too, but I had a little dog that I had with me all the time. And
Yeah.
the dogs were a great conversation point, but like, yeah, and I hate to like reduce a dog to a prop, but having something that like is a conversation starter goes so far, because just like having a reason to talk to somebody makes it that much easier. Because like, think of just like the barrier to talk to a stranger isn't really real most of the time, but we really feel like it is. And of course, sometimes it is, absolutely, and respect other people's boundaries. But most of the time, most people are probably like relatively some degree of open to being spoken with, and we just fear it,
Yeah.
and we most of the time, I think, don't have to if we have like basic common sense and ability to read. And of course, that's a challenge for some people too. So I don't want to minimize that it's just easy. It can be quite hard, but still, I think there's a lot of opportunity for most people most of the time to talk. And if you can like help out by having a silly shirt or a cute dog or whatever thing you can have, it helps. So I
You,
don't know,
you're,
metaverse wise, I'm not sure, but there's probably something in there. And I mean, Todd, you brought it up. I just really agree with you.
yeah, I mean, I think you're onto something there. That the easy conversation starter, is,
Hmm.
I smiled when you talked about the dog, because I said, well, it's one of the rules of the internet that anything having to do with cute pets, babies, or mullets from the '80s are sure to get a lot of social media lift.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I appreciate that idea, but I mean, you're right. Like, if there is something, obviously you get a silly shirt on or something, that's an easy conversation starter, for somebody, and especially for somebody
Mhm.
that has that hesitancy, or they're introverted and they don't want to say too much. Like, oh, hey, there's this easy thing for me to say, like, wow, I really love your shirt, or wow, where'd you get that shirt from, or something like that. Like, I think there's an internet equivalent of that to do to subvert expectations a little bit. That's pretty
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
So, man, there's just so many other, the comments are blowing up here. We're having a nice conversation here. I wanted to get, Marta said something else here. Sarah Seeger's intentional playful games. To give you an example, we tried bingo type quests to force people to talk to one another and find out who this
Mhm.
interesting fact belonged to. Even if they don't talk, they at least learn something about other people in the space. And that's one of the points, right? We want people to mix and learn and connect with each other, because that's the enriching experience of having those co-working spaces at the same time.
Yeah. It's a great
Really like,
suggestion.
yeah, really like that. Also wanted to mention, so in terms of co-working spaces online, there are tools now like Groove that let you come on. It matches you up with other people, and you do sort of work sprints together. Um, I, I wonder how that would interact with more of a physical co-working space, or if that could be like a more of a curated experience for people in a particular physical co-working space, but kind of set those work sprints with each other. I don't know if you ever did anything as formalized as that.
I
But
think quite informally we did stuff like that, because that's a lot of what the community manager does at their best, is sort of match people, I guess. I actually talked to my friend New, who I mentioned before, who is this great community manager. She's back home visiting her family in South Africa. So
yeah,
I called all the way to South Africa to prepare for this. And she was just like giving an example. It's like, oh, I know that, Stefan, really likes to ski in Austria. And I know that, Ulf over here, went to college in Vienna. Like, when they're in the kitchen together, I'm just gonna like drop that and be like, oh, you guys probably have something to talk about. And she did that all the time. And there's lasting friendships that have come from her sort of little social interventions,
that's
just kind
amazing.
of by knowing people and caring and taking an interest. So I think that's just a huge part of it. And that's not necessarily like, oh, getting people together to do work, but it's sort of matchmaking in a way. But yeah, I don't know, like, we didn't really do too formal things like that. And one of the sort of challenges of a co-working company is that you have people that are there for really different reasons. You have like sort of solo entrepreneurs that are there for maybe just to get out of the house, or maybe to
Mhm.
network, or both. You have like sort of smaller like startups that are kind of like in their like groove and like chasing funding, and are probably also trying to network and but just have a place to be that's affordable. You have like companies that are starting to scale up, and then they're kind of at this point, this inflection point, where like maybe their employees are like more employees than like directly invested in the company, and then they have a really different relationship to the space. And then when you get to companies that are like, we had one company that came in that was like a 5-person company, when they were just like, they were a little startup, and within I think a year they were like 200-300 people, and like
Wow.
we had to like accommodate them in this crazy space, um, and we're able to actually.
Wow.
But like, when you're like employee 200 in a pretty junior level position, you know, you're kind of like, whatever, this is just where my office is. I don't really know who is this person that's trying to give me cake, like, or get me to talk to someone else. Like, who are you? Are you my boss, or do I have to talk to you? So, like, and of course, I mean, most people like obviously basically understand what's happening, but it is sort of like you realize like, hey, this entrepreneur is super invested in this space, and this person is just like, not to reduce them, but they're just, like an employee at this company, and they're just coming to their job, and sure, they'll take a piece of cake, but they don't really care about the community. You get a
Right.
lot of entrepreneurs who don't care either. So I mean, it cuts in all directions, but so I think that's one of the challenges of trying to match make. But if you have, like, I'm kind of talking a lot here, sorry, but if you
Oh,
have
no.
kind of like, one thing that's sort of started to naturally happen is like attracts like, as we know, and different of our spaces started to attract different types of like companies that worked in the same spaces, and so there were some more opportunities, and I think we kind of also match
Match
made.
made.
Wow, that's not a, I don't know. I'll have to look that up later, how you're supposed to say that. But we did sort of do a little bit of matchmaking in some of those spaces in the areas. Like one of our places kind of had a lot of VR companies, which was really hot at the
Mm,
time.
mhm.
And now I'm blanking on what some of the other like sort of
But they were
overlaps
all
were, but there were
related.
a few like little
Yeah.
pockets of like companies working in the same field. So there are those opportunities, but there's just things to be mindful of, like anything.
Yeah, yeah. I wanted to get one more comment on here. I know we're getting a little low on time, but I love this from John Day. Mark's observation with personalities more inclined to engage in digital communities compared to in-person forums. Has there been any formal research in this space that's been published? Is it a Venn diagram? Well, maybe it is. For those better suited to respected forums and some more comfortable with both realms. That's very interesting. Yeah. Uh, well, I think as you were just saying, that there were some people that just kind of showed up there because they just wanted to have other human breathing around them
Mhm.
to do that, and then others who really wanted to be more connected to other folks, and there's probably some overlap there with willingness to be in an online space connected as well. Um, and I think
Yeah.
that there are also co-working situations where it's digital only, and then that opportunity to get together is just icing on the cake, so to speak. Uh, yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I don't know of any research, although I think it seems like I can see that maybe someone is working on that, which is super cool. I would love to learn more about what is learned from that, because yeah, it's a great question. And I think a lot of the co-working stuff was really, even though it wasn't new, it kind of was new. And I was working at this at the moment where it was really starting to be very hot. It was kind of like WeWork's ascendancy. And if you've seen, there's that like biopic about Adam Newman. I wanted to pronounce it in German for some reason. Um, and just like you can get a sense, and I mean, it's a Hollywood depiction by all means, but you get a sense of like kind of the chaotic behind the scenes life of working and co-working. And it was really chaotic, I will say. Like, it's another thing to like think about in co-working is like and like you are dealing with physical spaces and people's physical comfort and safety, unfortunately, sometimes.
Mhm.
And you can be like, I'm just casually thinking about how to get people to engage in Slack, and oh my God, the fire alarm is going off, and it's really a fire, like, wow, okay. Or like
Wow.
one time, New reminded me that like one time she was getting all these frantic phone calls that the police were trying to find her, and apparently she's like, why did the police want me? What did I do? And they were trying to get onto the roof. They were trying to get the SWAT team onto the roof of the building because of some situation in another building, which thankfully ended up being okay. But it's just like, what am I going to deal with today? And so yeah, it's really quite wild. And then you have to like really be there for your community when something like scary happens, or something like beyond disruptive. Like we had like actual fires where we had to evacuate one of our spaces for weeks while it was cleaned up. Like a battery fire that was super like crazy and toxic, and it wasn't like our fault, but it was our space, or so we had to you really be there and keep that community together, and that's not easy,
Yeah.
like for a lot of
Yeah.
reasons.
So I'm curious. My co-working experiences were from pre-pandemic times, and
Mm,
and in fact, I think even before the pandemic, the co-working facility that I was at ended up closing its doors. I had left Milwaukee by then, but I had heard that it had kind of gone away. These are difficult propositions to get started up and working now. Like what, like I have to imagine that the pandemic damaged a lot of co-working spaces.
yeah.
What's the state of the union today for them? And I'm sure Marta's got some thoughts about this too, if she's still on, has a chance to jump in.
Yeah, I would love to hear, because I left during the pandemic, about a year. I mean, depending on when you want to count it, starting about a year-ish into the pandemic. Not because of the pandemic, but because I just, found another opportunity that really appealed to me. But of course, it was a huge impact, and we had to shut down two spaces, and we had to let go. I, thankfully didn't have to make those hard choices myself, but had to let go of some really, really talented people.
Mhm.
And that, of course, sucks. What better
Yeah.
word is there than that, for this? But the space I was running at the time, because I went out and opened up this co-working space out in the Swedish suburbs, totally different culture. And also like across the street from an area that is sort of like got like, I'm not saying I agree with this, but it has this reputation as being like a notoriously like, rough part of town. And it's, like that often just means it's like more diverse and different, but people have these fears. But we were across the street from that, and we did have a really different cultural profile. A lot of people that didn't really speak Swedish or English, or well, they spoke
Mhm.
one or the other, I guess, but a lot of people that didn't speak English, which is unusual for here. And it was super cool. But like, anyway, I was out there for when the pandemic was starting, getting this place going, and it was odd because like people didn't really stop coming. We didn't have to close because Sweden approached it really differently. We did like distancing measures and encouraged people to stay home, and did like all these different like lines and keeping people apart from each other. But yeah, people didn't really stop coming. And some of that was like, one of our companies was a media company that was an Arabic language media service, and the largest Arabic language news service in Sweden, actually. And so
Mhm.
they were open and running and doing super important reporting. And even like I'm trying to think of what his title is. Sort of like the Secretary of the Interior for Sweden or something like that,
Okay.
like came to our
Yeah.
office and was like talking to the Arabic language community through their channel. And like the like highest economic minister in the Swedish government was there for them. And so it was like I was, it was like at my office watching these like Swedish dignitaries walk through. I'm like, okay, I don't know, like the pandemic is just a wild experience in many ways, and here's my version of it. But yeah, so I don't know, like, but like I said, it was a really uneven impact because our place like kept growing, and then some of our other offices closed.
Yeah. Yeah. Just a
And then I don't know the
hopefully
state
we're
of the
past
union now.
a lot of that conflict and chaos now. Even though it's still out there as an illness, it's not having quite the same impact as it did in years past. So hopefully we're down the road from that and can all celebrate with each other a little bit more frequently. I just wanted to acknowledge a couple of other quick comments. Before we wrap up the show here today, I really like this. Being mindful of individuals who are neurodiverse or have disabilities, whether evident or non-evident, and ensuring that there are safe spaces for them, both in the physical environment as well as in the virtual environment. And so having
Mm,
accommodations. I would fall back on the old saying that I've heard from experts in this space in the past, which is good accessibility is good design for everybody. So, kind of, building in safety into the physical as well as the digital spaces, ways for people to communicate more easily, to feel connected, to feel seen and heard. So important to do. And then one more comment from Stefania. Curious to hear how you deal with conflicts in the communities. Any particular tactics or approaches you found helpful? Mark, what do you think?
I mean, we had some real conflicts too. Like, we had this one company that was like a phone sales company, or at least they were like the department that did that for like an events company, and they were awesome, nice people, but they were really loud and liked to ring a bell whenever they made a sale and this and that, which, that's cool. But they were next to this guy who was just wanted silence, and he was so mad about them all the time. And he and like the boss of that company got into some kind of altercation in the kitchen, like physically, and had to be held
Kitchen
apart.
again.
Yeah. So the gravitational pull is not always positive, it turns out.
Yeah.
But one time he came, and it was a colleague's first day on the job, and I was telling her about, and then, it's a little while, but it's pretty fun and interesting, and people are great. And then there's this pounding on my door, and this guy comes, and he's just yelling at me in Swedish, which is always like, no matter how fluent you are, it's not, your fluency isn't so great when someone's yelling at you. But he was just outraged by it, and like, yelling at me in Swedish, and I'm kind of like watching my new colleague like, I don't know that this is really the nice thing you just told me it was. But anyway, it happens, like, and I'm sure anybody who runs a co-working space, Marta and any of her colleagues and anyone else here can tell you, like, you will get angry people, and sometimes they'll have like a legitimate cause or gripe, sometimes less so, or at least it's hard for you to empathize enough to really get it. But either way, like, obviously, like, knowing how to de-escalate stuff is super key, whether it's at you or just between other people. That's like step one. It's like, what do you do to like get it back to like a calm, safe situation? Like, how can you do that? What tactics? And there's a ton of ways, and I'm sure a lot of us probably know them pretty instinctively. But if you're working in those actual situations where it's likely or almost guaranteed to occur, it's really good to maybe take a quick course or read a book about de-escalation. So that's number one. And then, of course, when it comes to conflicts, it's like, it's always about just trying to like understand, right? And trying to like, not be wounded and not have your ego lead the way, but sort of set yourself aside and just try to be like, okay, like, let's move past right and wrong and try to like understand what we can do to move this thing forward in as positive way for both sides as possible. Some conflicts can't really be resolved in a way that everybody's happy with, and that's also something to know. But you absolutely, like, de-escalation is non-negotiable,
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think like on the front end of that as well, having good guidelines in place and sort of having some rules of conduct within both the online and the physical environments of what's okay and what's definitely not okay. And
I mean, rules are a little like interesting too, because like they're great, and I think they sort of like look good, but are harder in the moment to really refer to, because like when something's escalated, it's sometimes pointing to the rule can escalate the situation further if you're not careful. That's the only caveat I would give, is like, if someone's feeling like really righteous in their anger, finding out that it's against the rules isn't necessarily good for de-escalation, but it's probably important for like the longer term holistic approach to solving the situation, that there is some kind of rule, and it can certainly help.
Yeah, I love that. Marta seems like she's been through through all the different versions of difficulty in those spaces as well.
Totally, I really relate to that. Seeing as some of those, there a lot of drama. I mean, it's people, I mean, that's any community, I suppose. But like, co-working, I don't know. It's really throwing a lot of like different elements in the same space, and like hoping that alchemy turns into something nice. And sometimes it turns into romance, and sometimes it turns into fist fights, and sometimes it turns into a nice coffee party, and sometimes it turns into a lot of like stony silences. you know.
Yeah. Well, Mark, I know we've gone longer than many of our episodes, and I appreciate everybody that's stuck with us through this, because it's been a fascinating conversation. We've had a lot to talk about, and the interactions on the chat have been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for all of the different ideas
Yeah.
that you brought to this, Mark, and to all the contributors, in the conversation here. I will get back in and respond to everybody when we get back, when we go end the show here. But Mark, if somebody wants to talk further with you about co-working, or if they want to engage you in some consulting work, what's a good way to go about learning more?
Yeah, I mean, you can find me on LinkedIn, or I have a really simple website that also can get you to my LinkedIn, or just get you directly in contact with me, which is markshaw.me, or you can also get there with ohhimarkshaw.com,
Nice.
either or. And yeah, I'd be super happy to connect. Whether, I mean, I really love connecting with community people, because we all have so much in common, whether it's the co-working space or any of the other things I've done or things I've never done. It's super cool to learn. So, please do get in touch or connect, or both.
Mark Shaw, thanks for being on the show, man. I would love to have you back again sometime to hear more. We didn't even really get to touch on TEDxStockholm, which is a whole other topic of conversation. So maybe we
That's
can
true.
schedule a one-off conversation about that at some point. But thanks again for being on the show. And for those of you who have tuned in on today's show, thank you so much for being part of our live show. And if you happen to have caught this after as a replay, I want to hear from you too. Yes, I'm talking to you. Please
In the future.
drop on a comment. I would love to respond back. And for anybody, again, I'm always deeply appreciative if you subscribe to the Clocktower Advisors YouTube channel, and comment and share with friends if you find it valuable or interesting content. We do a lot of deep dive interviews like this, and so hopefully there's some resources there for you that you'll find useful in your day-to-day life. In the meantime, please tune in again on February the 9th with Phil Gerbyshak. We'll be talking about doubling your sales growth while building a sense of community and belonging. I think it'll be a great topic, and we'll have a lot of fun. Phil is an amazing, fun guy. He's a terrific online personality in his own right, and does a lot of great work for a lot of people. In the meantime, please be good to yourselves and to each other, and keep building great communities. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.